All right, so it is 7:02 on a Monday, which means it's time for us to draw some things in Fusion 360. Um, some people join us live, some people watch the recording after the fact. We got a couple people joining us live right here, and today we are going to be working on the Rainmaker project, right? So this is kind of where we finished, or where we finished last week with our Rainmaker project, our money shooting tool. We got our money tray drawn last week. The week before that, we did our roller with our rubber gripper on the top. And this week, my hope is to get here. So this is the body, the enclosure of the upper part of our roller. Next week we'll do a handle. But the upper part of our roller is right here. And there'll be some room for creative freedom here. But the gist of it is we're going to be leaving the comfort of and diving into the surface area here. So normally we hang out in this solid area. It's kind of the default in Fusion, making like solid shapes. We're going to dive into surfaces in this area, and a surface is let me just turn off, is something like this. In fact, here, you know what I can do? I can isolate. So this is a surface body here. So it is a body that has zero thickness. So what do I mean like that when I say zero thickness? So if I do a section analysis here, you can see that this body here has no thickness. It's like a piece of paper basically, except it's just kind of a representation of a piece of paper, because even a piece of paper has thickness. But that's what we're going to dive into today. This is a cool area. We're going to go kind of slow because we're going to do some lofts here, and this is a new area for us. So as usual, stop me if you guys have questions. Feel free to pipe up. You can either like do the raise your hand thing in the Google meeting. There's like a little hand icon, and I'll try to listen for that and watch for that. Or you can like unmute yourself and just shout at me. Just shout my name, and I will 100% listen. Cool. So I'm gonna turn on what we got of our roller here so far. So I'm at the place you guys are at, and we're gonna start the same way we had been starting, by creating a new component. So each one of these individual classes have been their own component, and we're going to keep that going. Today we're going to create a new component. So my main document component right now is my active component. So I've got the little radio button checked next to that main document component. So that way when I click on create and then new component, it makes that component inside of our main document component here. So I'm going to call this the body, or I guess you could call it the shell. I'm going to call it the body, but whatever makes sense to you. This is the upper enclosing shape around most of our tool here, so I'm just going to call it the body. And I'm going to choose to make it the active component, because I'm going to start drawing in that right away. So it'll switch our active component from the Rainmaker main document component to this new component we are creating. And now we've got our new component made. So now the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to locate a couple of planes. So we're going to choose to make this I'm choosing to make this using the loft command here. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a shape over on this side, and we're going to draw a shape somewhere over on this side, and then we're going to loft those two shapes into each other. If I can not get lost in my 3D environment here. I'm going to loft those two shapes into each other. So we're going to start by creating our surfaces that we're going to create those two drawings on. So From my construct menu, I'm going to come up here and grab an offset plane option here. And the plane I'm going to offset this from is the very front surface of my money tray, of my cash tray here. So that's the kind of where the opening is of our money shooting tool here, the Rainmaker. And I'm going to offset this just like 1/4 of an inch, just because I want to have the opening of my money shooting tool a little bit in front of the actual opening. 1/4 of an inch might be too much. I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch. But I just want to have a little bit of room in between the tray and the shell that's enclosing it. So I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch there as an offset, and I'm going to say OK. So one of the things we're doing in this project is we're trying to stay organized. That's why we're, like making lots of new components, and we're also making sure we name our construction planes and name our bodies. This construction plane is going to be the front. It's the part where we're going to draw the front of the money tool on. So I'm just going to call it front. And then we're going to spin around to the back, because I'm going to make that construction plane right now as well. So from the construct menu, I'm going to choose this plane at an angle option, because I'd like to have the back face of my money shooting tool at a slight angle. So if I choose this plane at an angle option and I pick this very bottom of my money tray line here, and now I spin this around so I can rotate it to like a 45-degree angle. So you can see I rotate. Oh, wow. Fusion really likes to jump around a lot. All right, so I've rotated it to like a 45-degree angle there. And then I'm going to say OK. And we're going to name this plane as well. So this plane is our back angle. And now the last thing that I want to do before we start making sketches is the actual surface that I draw on, I want it to be slightly back from the back surface here. So I want to give a little room for Jesus, just like I did up front here. So in order to create that space, I'm going to offset this plane that I just made that same 1/8 of an inch. So if I come up to the construct menu again and I choose offset plane, and now the plane that I'm going to offset from is that plane that we just made. So I can either click on it here in the drawing view, or I can click on it over here in my construction folder in my browser. And then I'm going to do that same, this time it's a -1/8 of an inch. For some reason for me it's going -1/8 of an inch. But I just want to create just a little bit of gap, just a little bit of air gap there. Just some room, some clearance, let's call it, whatever you want to call it, some room for there between our body surface and our cash tray. All right. So now I'm going to click OK, and we've got a third and final construction plane to name before we start drawing, and I'm just going to call this the back. So that back angle construction plane, I don't really need to look at that. All I needed to do, I needed to create this in order to create the plane that we're actually going to do our drawing on. But so for now, I'm just going to turn that off so I don't accidentally click on it when I'm starting to draw my actual sketches here. And speaking of my actual sketches, let's go ahead and make one. So from the Create menu here, I'm going to go ahead and choose to create a new sketch. And I'm going to create that sketch on the front construction plane. So I'm going to start with the front of my money shooting tool here. So I'm going to hover over that plane and just click on it here. And now we're spinning around, so we're looking straight at it. And while we can see here, we've got our kind of ghosted out. In fact, I'm going to turn off my back construction plane just for now, just so there's less visual clutter here. So we got a kind of a ghosted out image of our cache tray. And this is the area that we need to enclose with this surface that we're going to make. So whatever drawing we make on the front of this needs to kind of fully enclose this cache tray. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my, for me, the best way to do this, I think, is with my center rectangle tool. So if I grab my center rectangle tool, I can place the center rectangle right at this origin here and then kind of expand it outward. And I just need to make sure that I go outside of the edges of that cache tray. So in here is not going to work. I need to be outside of the edges of my cache tray and fully enclose them. And I want to give it a little bit of character. I don't want to have just a plain rectangle here. So on the sides, I'm going to choose to add a little bit of shape, some dimension. So I'm just going to grab my line tool. I'm going to come and grab my line tool, and I'm going to draw in just a little, some character, some sort of character in the front there. And now, in order to mirror, in order to have that character over on the other side so it's symmetrical, now I suppose you don't need it to be symmetrical. If you wanted to make an asymmetrical shape here, in fact, let me use this other side to kind of give you some examples of some other things that you could do. You could draw like a curve there, and then you could have a line connecting the bottom. That's also, you know, kind of a fun character shape. Let's see, what else could we do here? We could draw, it could just be a circle. You could have, this is one I don't use very often, this arc that is a center point arc here. If we, I don't even know how to use this tool. If we stop moving our mouse, we have to place the center point first. And then we place an end point and then place another end point. So you could have it be like circular at the front. That's up to you. I leave the ball in your court there. But once you have one of your sides drawn, we're going to need a mirror line in which to mirror it across. So if I just grab my line tool from my create menu and then grab this line option, I can hover over what appears to be the center point, and when I get near it, it snaps to and gives me that little blue triangle indicating that it is the center point of that line. I can just draw a line straight up. And I know I'm drawing a line straight up because I get that little blue square that tells me it's a 90-degree angle, or it's a perpendicular angle to the line that I'm drawing it from. And that line doesn't need to be any particular length. It just needs to go straight up and down. And now I can grab from my create menu, I can come and grab my mirror tool. So create and then mirror. And the lines, the objects that I want to mirror are whatever the lines that make up the side of my character of my front face here. And then the mirror line that I'm going to choose is going to be that straight up and down vertical line there. And now I'm going to say OK. Now, the last thing that I want to do here, just for some cleanup of our drawing, because like I said, in this drawing, we're trying to stay nice and organized. And this may actually be necessary. So we've got these extra lines that are kind of interior here, and then we've got this mirror line up here. I've had weird things happen when I make surfaces that have kind of like, I don't know, more than one enclosed shape, or like lines that have 3 intersection points, like here and here and here, where there's 3 lines that kind of intersect. Weird things can happen there. So I'm going to make sure that I turn those lines, that mirror line, and then this up and down line that was just kind of a remnant of the center point rectangle that I made. I'm going to turn those into construction lines. So I'm just going to hover over them, and then I can either click on the X key on my keyboard, or in my my sketch palette, the line type, I can just choose that construction option there, and it will convert that to a construction line. And then, you know, the difference here is now this is kind of like one enclosed shape, as opposed to this is two enclosed shapes. And I've had better luck using the surface tools when I don't have like lines that intersect in a lot of places there. So, all right, so now we're done with this sketch. Once you've got your front shape drawn, you can click Finish Sketch here. And we've got a Sketches folder that's appeared. And in that Sketches folder, we've got a sketch to name. The name of this sketch is just going to be Front. Or Opening, I guess, would also be a fine option, because that's the direction from which the cash comes. All right, so now we want to draw the back of our money shooting tool here. So I'm going to turn on the back construction plane that we already made, and I'm going to do that same process again. I am going to spin around, so I'm kind of looking at the back though. And this doesn't really matter a whole lot. If you're looking at this plane from this side of the plane, my theory is it's when it spins you around, so you're looking at this straight up two-dimensional surface, it spins you around to this side of the plane that you're closest to. If you're looking at the other side of the plane, it'll spin you around to that side. Now, all of our bodies and components here are ghosted out, so we can see through them, so it doesn't really matter, I guess, but just probably one of those good practice things. So I'm going to spin around, so I'm looking at the back side of my plane or my money shooting tool here, and now when I go ahead and click on Create and then Create Sketch, now I hover over that construction surface that we made, that construction plane that we made. Now I'm looking right down at it. All right. And on this surface, we want to do a very similar thing. We just need to create a shape that is going to fully enclose the back of our money shooting tool here. So from the Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and grab another center rectangle. For me, it works out that I can, probably place it at the origin here and move it outwards just so I kind of fully encompass that shape back there. And I want to give this a little character too, but instead of some angled lines on the side, I'm going to choose to make a 3-point arc on the top of my tool here. So if I grab from my Create menu and the Arc menu, the 3-point arc option here, I'm just going to make a arc that kind of just makes a nice little subtle-ish curve. I guess that's not so subtle. That's a subtle curve. This is a pretty overt curve. I'm going to make a very overt curve on the top of the back of my money shooting tool here. So, in the same way that I made sure to get rid of extraneous lines here, this line here is not really needed to outline this shape, so I'm going to change this line into a construction line just by hitting the X key on my keyboard. And now we've got kind of one full surface back there, which is good. And you can be interesting with this for sure. I could draw out, lines here, and I could make it come down, and you could get pretty interesting with these surfaces. But I've left mine fairly plain-ish. I will say, the other thing too that I'll mention is I kind of like, I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Sketch here. In previous drawings that I've done, I kind of like when the front of the the front of the tool is bigger or is wider than the back of the tool. I think it looks cool like that. It's kind of, opens towards where it shoots the stuff out of the mouth of a tool. So, I've liked previous versions that I've done where you make this wider. But the beautiful thing about Fusion 360 is this is all parametric, so it's really easy to go back after the fact and modify something about this sketch and then see how it affects outcomes later. So, all right, we're going to keep moving. I've got another sketch to name. This is the back of my money tool here. And now we want to connect these shapes together. We want to use, we're going to be in the surface area. So I'm going to right now, before I forget, leave the comfort of my solid environment here, and I'm going to click on the little tab right next to it, which is the surface tab, so I don't accidentally make the wrong kind of loft, because there are some overlapping tool names. So there is an extrude option here in the surface world. There is a loft option here in the surface world, but they work differently. So let's go ahead and leave that and come to our friendly warm orange tools now. Let's go ahead and loft these to each other and see what happens. So from the Create menu, I'm going to come down and grab my Loft tool. And now I've got my Loft tool here, and I'm going to go around and can I just pick this face? I don't think I want to do that, actually. I think I want to go around and I need to pick the individual lines that make up this shape that I drew in the front here. Now, I did not hover over the center and click. I went around and picked the individual lines around that shape. And then over here in my Loft window, I see I've got one profile selected. I need to have 2 or more profiles selected to create a loft. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this little plus button here in my Loft window. And if I click on this little plus button, now I can do that same operation to the back sketch. So I can click on the individual line segments. There we go. All right. That make up the back of my object here. And now I'm just going to say OK. So you can see that it created and did indeed create a shape that goes in between these two shapes here. But it's not really what I was going for. So what I want to do is I want to control the path that it takes to get from one shape to another. And if I go back to edit that loft feature, back in this window, we can see that there is this option down here for rails. And you can have different types of rails. You can have a center line, or you can have individual sides, and this is the option we're going to go with. But we need to create that path in a sketch that we can then select here. So I'm going to go ahead and say cancel now. And I've got this loft already made. So what I want to do is I want to go back and make a sketch that will make up the rails for this loft. But I want to do it before I made this loft. So I kind of did this on purpose because sometimes it's convenient to know that down here in your timeline, I can click on this little playhead. This is kind of like my current position. And I can go back in time just by dragging that backwards one icon. And now I'm back in time to before I made that loft. And I can do more stuff like for example, first we'll need to create a construction plane. So that mirror, that line that I made conveniently, that was the mirroring for my little, oh boy. Does your Fusion jump around a lot on you too? Mine jumps around a lot on me when I'm rotating. All right, so that mirror line that I made here, in order to mirror the side of my front of the character of the front of my tool over to the other side, I'm going to use that as a line on which to create our construction plane that we're going to draw our paths on. So from the construct menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose this plane at an angle option again. And now the plane that the line that I'm going to choose to make a plane at an angle from is that line that I made that I used as a mirror line. And we just need to rotate this around, or I need to rotate this around so it's splitting our tool right in half. So sometimes I gotta toggle my view so I can kind of see if it needs to be 90 or 0 or 180 or whatever it needs to be. So we split our tool right in half, and for me it's 90 degrees. 90 or negative 90, either one gets you the same result. And then I'm just going to click on OK here. And now on this plane, oh, first we got to name that plane. It's time for everybody's favorite game. Name that plane. This is our path plane, because we're going to draw our path on there. It's our loft plane, I guess you could call it. All right, but on that plane, we're going to make a sketch. So I'm going to come up here from my Create menu. And you know what? I'll mention this too, is because this plane exists infinitely in all directions. However, it only shows a representation of it that is very small, this being this yellow surface. And this is small because the item we made it from was small. However, like I said, it goes off infinitely, and you can choose to make it visually bigger. You just have to hover over these edges of this visual representation. Sometimes I like to make my construction plane visually approximately the size of whatever I'm going to draw on it, just as a visual cue, visual reference. This is totally not necessary, but for my own sanity, this is something that I have been in the habit of doing, and sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes I don't name my planes, and then I have to try to figure out which plane I need to use, and it's easier if they're visually what's on them to kind of narrow that down. So just kind of a best practice. Again, the best practice is to name your construction planes, but making them visually the right size will help for organization probably at some point in your Fusion 360 life. All right, so now that that's over with, let's go ahead and create this sketch. So we'll go ahead and click on Create, and then Create Sketch. And I'm going to hover over that nice giant path plane that I just made, visually huge, and click on it out here. Now, before we start drawing our path, the key point to consider when we are making this path for this loft is we need to have points on this path that we're making exist the same place in space, in three-dimensional space, as a point on the front of our front sketch and a point on our back sketch. So the first thing I'm going to do is find those points. So what point is it on this arc that intersects with the plane that I currently am drawing on? And we can do that by clicking on the Create menu and then coming down to the Project Include option. And we want to find the intersection. So this Intersect option here. So the point at which a sketch intersects with this plane, or I guess you can do this for bodies too. So a body intersects with this drawing plane that we're drawing on here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this intersect option. And if I hover over, I'm going to zoom in here. If I hover over this line, this curve that is the top back of my tool here, I get a little red dot that appears, and that is that intersection point. So if I click on that curve there, we get a little purple dot that's appeared, and now that's a plane, that's a point that exists on both sketches. I'm going to do that for the bottom as well, so I'm going to hover over the bottom, and I'm still got my intersect tool selected here, so I've got a point at the top and a point at the back of my back sketch, and the same in the front. I'm going to find a point at the top and a point at the bottom of my front sketch. So if I hover over this line here that represents my my front sketch, then I can project that point, and then the bottom of my front sketch, I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to hover over this bottom line, and I get that little red dot that appears, and I'll just click, and I've got now 4 items selected, and those 4 items I can see right here are selected in my geometry section here. So now I can say OK. All right, now just for the sake of less visual clutter, I'm going to choose to turn off my front sketch and my back sketch. So now I've just got those purple points that I made, and if I look at the right side of my view here, now I can clearly see what kind of path I need to make that will allow it to encompass this shape. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my line tool, and from the front top point that I made, I'm just going to draw a line at a steepish angle like this. That seems pretty fine. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the little green finish icon there. And now I'm going to grab my 3-point arc tool, and I'm going to draw a 3-point arc back here that connects these lines together. Something to note here is when you're drawing a path, your path has to be, I don't know, smooth, I guess is the word for it. So here, when I've got this little tangency constraint that's popping up here, that little blue circle with a line underneath it, that's what I'm calling a smooth path. Here, if I make it like this, here where we have a corner is not a smooth path. You will not have a good time if you try to make a loft that has corners in the path. No matter how shallow they are, the Loft Tool will swear at you, and like I said, you will not be having a good time. And the most important part about using Fusion 360 is having a good time. All right, so I'm going to draw the finish, or the completion of that, making sure just I got that little tangency constraint there. On the bottom, I'll show you how to get around that no corners rule. So I'm going to grab my line tool, and I'm just going to draw a line from the front bottom towards the back bottom here, and I'm going to make it like down here-ish. And now I'm making a corner to connect those two things. However, the trick that I have to get around this no corners in paths rule is from the modify menu. If I just grab this fillet option, I can click on each part of these lines, and I can just give it the tiniest little fillet. Just make it like 0.1. I mean, that's basically a corner for all intents and purposes. It's a corner. I mean, I get the mentality where it's like either you have a corner or you don't have a corner, and I guess technically we do not have a corner here, but visually it's a corner. All right, so that's an option for you if you want to have more angular-ish looking shapes here. All right, now once we've got our two path lines drawn, and those paths are going to go outside of the space that the interior furniture, let's call it, is taking up, then I can go ahead and click this Finish Sketch option. And now, if I take my little playhead icon and I scoot it forward, so I'm now kind of like in the present, because remember, we were doing this all in the past before we made our loft. Now, if we jump into the present, after we've made our loft, we can right-click on the loft down in our timeline, the loft where we were making this body surface, and say Edit Feature. Now we can utilize the option here for rails. So, wow, my dialog box is looking weird. All right, so I'm going to click on this as a guide type. I'm going to choose rails, as opposed to this center line option, because we did indeed draw rails. Now, you could have drawn more than one rail. We could have had like 4 rails. We could have drawn rails for the side shape as well. But, you know, 2 is a little bit easier for us. But no, you can draw more than 2 rails if you'd like to. And now the rails I'm going to go ahead and select by hitting this little plus button here. And now I have to pick on each one of the line segments that made up my rail here. So you can see I've only clicked on one. I've got these like red dots and I've got like an error going on. But once I complete the line segments that go all the way from one side to the other, then it will start to give me that shape. So now I've got my top rail selected, and you can see it's done something interesting there. So options if you only want to make one rail. But if we go ahead and hit the plus button again, and now I start selecting the bottom path for our rail, something to note here is because I made that tiny little fillet, I have to click on the little fillet and then the line after that. So there's actually 3 line segments down there. I'll say this also, that if I go back here, I've had bad luck if I try to say, oh, I need to pick the rail that goes down here on the bottom from one side to the other. So if I click on this one, and then I click on this one, and then I come in here and then try to pick something in the middle, yeah, sure enough, it did it. So I definitely have all 3 of those line segments chosen. However, it's not doing it. It's giving me an error. It's saying the rails don't intersect all the profiles. And I found that the only thing that I change here is you really have to click on them in order. So I've got to go in order from one side to the other. So I've got to click on that line, and then I've got to click on the very next line segment, and then the very next line segment, and so on. The order, you really have to pick them in order. Otherwise, it swears at you and gives you errors and does all sorts of unhappy bad stuff. And then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. All right. So that looks a lot better, right? We're more fully enclosing our surface. Now, I'm not fully enclosing it all the way. I've got some little corners sticking out the back here. And there's 2 ways that I could fix that. Either I could go to the sketch that made up the back of my shape here, and I could, kind of move it up a little bit, or make it a little bit bigger in the back. Or I could change the sketch that is this profile on the top here. And I like this curve the way it is. So I am going to choose to modify my back sketch. So I'm going to turn on my back sketch. I'm going to right click on it and I'm just going to say edit that sketch. And now I think literally I can just move this up. Can I move you up? I cannot. What if I get that weird selection type again? What if I select all that? Can I move that up? Nope. Somehow it's constrained to that origin there. So, but I can. Oh, that's a weird thing that's choosing to do. I can move up that line segment. It's weird. Somehow when you move sketches around, weird things happen. This is one of those weird things. What if I move you up first? Nope. Make it wider. Oh, because it's a center rectangle. So it's always going to be stuck on that origin point. Sometimes that bites me in the butt. Here, so here, if I zoom in, I wonder, because I'm choosing to constrain this on the origin point, I've got all, these are all coincident constraints if I zoom in. If I just delete those, will it let me move it? Hey, there we go. Lets me move the bottom now. Yay. So now that I deleted those coincident constraints, although if I move that up, I think I'm going to mess up my loft. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I'm just going to move this up a little bit and then say finish sketch. Oh, look at that. It didn't mess it up. I thought for sure because I moved up the sketch, so now the points that I projected are not at the same point here, but it turns out it did just fine with it. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. The last thing we need to do with this particular surface is, well, we've got a sketch to name, so I didn't name my path sketch. And then the back of our, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my sketches. In fact, we've got a body to look at. So I'm going to spin this down. We've got a bodies folder now. Now this body, this is going to be our main body. I'm going to call it the main body. We're going to use this surface a lot. So I'm just going to call it the main body and call it a day here. Now the back of this and the front of this, we want to close up. So from my create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose this patch option. And now if I hover over the back of my, the back edge of the tool of my gun, tool, and highlighted it, goes ahead and makes them all blue around the outside. So now I'm kind of patching that area and making it an enclosed surface. And I'm going to say OK here. And now I'm going to do that same operation to the front. However, if we do that to the front, we're not going to have an opening for our cache to come out anymore. So let's add that opening for our cache to come out on our front sketch. So instead of making a new sketch, we'll add it to the existing sketch here. So if I go ahead and click on this front sketch in my sketches folder and right click on it and say edit sketch, now I'm back in time to the very first, one of the first things we did here. And I can see clearly the opening in my cache tray is right here. So if I go ahead and grab my, I'm going to go ahead and choose a center rectangle again. And if I get my cursor near the center of that opening top to bottom, it's easy to get it in the center right to left. And I'll click and just place a rectangle that's just a little bit bigger than the opening that my cache is already set to come out of there. And now that we've got that opening added to our front sketch, we can say Finish Sketch. And now if I turn that on, if I turn on my front sketch, so I just turn that on and we can see our opening that we just drew in there. And now I'm going to grab that patch tool again. So from my Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose this patch option. And now if I hover over the area in between where I made that opening and the outer part of my surface here, my drawing, my sketch, then it fills in that area for us, and we can just say OK. All right, so I'm going to turn off my front sketch again. We're almost done with this surface. So something I'd like to point out is a surface has a front and a back, which makes sense somehow. Because if you have 0 dimensions, obviously you have a front and a back. But so the surfaces do indeed have front and back. This will become critical for us later because we're going to do things relative to this surface to create like actual bodies, actual 3-dimensional objects, and they will need a direction to go. So you need to tell them if they're going towards the front or towards the back. And if we have some of them one way and some of them the other way, then that'll mess us up. So right now I want you to kind of take a visual inspection of your shape here and make sure that you see all gray. Gray is the color of the front. Yellow is the color of the back. And for me, I have one surface that is facing the wrong direction. So from the Modify menu, I just need to come up and find this Reverse Normal option. It's like halfway down. It flips the normal direction of the selected surface body. So this patch tool, or the first patch that I did that was the back of my tool, it made that surface in the other direction. So if I just grab this Reverse Normal option and I click on, I can either click on it, I think, in my drawing view or in my browser. Yeah, so I can click on it in my browser or my drawing view, and it goes ahead and makes that gray, so it has flipped that surface around. So I can just click on OK here, and then we're good. All right, so now we've got our shape done, but we need to create one body out of this shape. And if you look at our bodies folder, we indeed have more than one body. So we've got a body that is kind of the main shape we drew. We've got a body that's the back. We've got a body that's the front here. And from those bodies, we need to join them together. And in the surface workspace here, joining surfaces together is called stitching. So if I grab from the Modify menu and come down to this, like, I don't know, 7th option from the top is the Stitch command. And if I choose that Stitch command, I think I can do it. Yeah, so there's 2 ways you can do this. So you can click on the individual bodies that you want to stitch together. So I want to stitch, or I guess surfaces. So I want to stitch my main body surface to my back surface here. Can I do this all at once? I didn't realize I can do this all at once. Look at that, I can do it all at once. The first couple of times I've been doing this separately. So you can click on all 3 of our bodies to stitch them all together. And you can see it made a bunch of green lines and red lines. So the green lines is where things are being stitched. I'm not sure what's being stitched down there on that green line, but things are being stitched together. And I clicked on them in my drawing view. However, if you know which bodies are touching each other, I can click on them in my browser as well. So I can click on the body, the surface bodies in the bodies folder of my browser, and that will work as well. And then I can say OK, and it's going to go ahead and totally remove the name that I created for that. So this is my main body. All right, we are going to do one last thing before we wrap up here. So we didn't get quite as far as I was hoping to do today, but that's all right. Surfaces get complicated. Lofts are complicated themselves. So I went a little slower. I hope that's okay with you guys. The last thing that I want to do here today is to kind of show you how to turn this body into a three-dimensional shape. And we're going to do that several times, but I'll just do it once with you guys here now. So from the Create menu, there is an option called Thicken. And we're going to use the Thicken command heavily when we're in the Surface Workspace, and we're going to use it a lot for next class. We're going to be thickening this main body literally over and over again to create the various layers of our shape here. I'll illustrate that after I enter in a number here. So I'm going to make this 1/8 of an inch. That'll be kind of like the basic thickness of the walls of my tool here. So 1/8 of an inch is kind of our basic thickness. There'll be an overmold that's a little bit thicker, and the overmold will go into that 1/8 of an inch a little bit. But so the maximum thickness of the plastic part of our tool is this number here, which I'm choosing as 1/8 of an inch. We'll make that a new body, and we'll say OK. And now we actually have a three-dimensional. Now this is a real body. You could actually 3D print this right now. So like I said, we're not going to because we got more steps to do here. For an example, we're going to end up with a body that looks more like, come on now, why aren't you, got you, do I have a surface on that shouldn't be on? That's that body, all right. Oh, it's because I turned off. I had them all turned off. So we're going to have a body that looks more like this by the end of next class. And we're going to do it. In fact, you know, like I leave it up to you. If you guys feel like you're up for a challenge, if you want to try to work ahead, this would be a good challenge. So I used the Thicken command. Oh, I need this window. I used the Thicken command to, I started with this body, and then I thickened it, and I got, well, I ended up cutting it in half, but I got that body, right? So you can see this has got some interesting shape going on to it. And then we're going to use the Thicken command again and make another body that is our overmold. And in fact, probably like 2 more bodies, because here I've got, you can see I've got kind of layers to my overmold. So I did this all with the Thicken command and a couple of sketches. So I had some sketches that I used to cut out the top and cut out the sides. Again, this is what we'll be doing next week. But, you know, if you feel like doing some experimentation on your own and just kind of playing and having fun, knowing that we're going to cover all this stuff next week, feel free to give it a whirl. But next week, our goal is to end up with an overmolded shell over our body that right now just looks like this. Turn all my bodies on here. There we go. Cool. Do you guys have any questions? How'd you guys do? Did I go too fast? Did I go too slow?
I managed to put it together. Mine
Sweet.
ended up looking significantly weirder because
Okay.
I played a little bit too much with the path line. But
That's not a thing. Playing is fun. That's what we're here for.
fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, came together.
Cool. Mike, you did good too?
I was just following along.
Cool. Right on.
This is a little bit advanced for me.
Yeah. Surfaces are complicated. So that's part of the reason I'm glad we didn't get as far as we did. Is it's nice to just focus on some basics. I guess it's hard to call surfaces basics, but because when you end up with a complicated curve shape like this, there's bound to be complexity, right? But I think that the key points that I really want to harp on is your loft will only work if they've got a shared point, right? If this path doesn't have a shared point with both of the sketches that you're lofting between, then it won't do it. And then the other point that I want to harp on, and you don't need to make two. I could have made that shared point if I would have made that shared point the center point of both of these sketches. I could have just drawn one path and then chose that center line option, right? So when we were making this loft, I could have made just one path and made it and chosen this center line option. And I think that center line option works even if it's not on the center. It doesn't necessarily need to be the center point of each of the sketches. That I think that center line option will work then as well. But because I wanted to give this tool a fat booty, then cause I like that thickness back here because the handle will go right down here. So I like to have that thickness back there. I thought that was kind of cool. And then the last thing, the other main thing that I'll mention again is when you're connecting, if you've got a loft rail, I'm going to delete this one, that is made up of more than one line segment, you got to click on them in order. In order from front to back or back to front, is from one side to the other. And here I've got the tiniest little fillet, so I got to click on that 1 second, and then the next line segment third. If you don't go in order, sometimes you forget you made a little fillet and you can't even see it until you zoom in so much that you're like, why won't that loft? And your line segments, they got to be connected from front to back in order. So, all right, cool. So that'll do for this week. Made some good progress. And like I said, next week, with a little bit of hope and prayer, we'll hopefully get to this. This is an exercise for me in stopping and thinking. So, because these overmolded shapes are pretty cool and super fun, and I'm excited about this project. Overmolding is fun. So, hope you guys are enjoying it too. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. Thank
See
you
you
much,
next time.
Carl.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.
Yep, good night.